So the first agenda item for the Board of Education is a public hearing to receive public comments on the proposal to sell bonds in the amount of $5,300,000 for the purpose of renovating, repairing, and equipping district facilities. All persons desiring to be heard will have an opportunity to present written or oral testimony with respect thereto. Mr. Inger, could you please present an overview of the bond issuance?
Yes, thank you, President Murphy. As we talked about last meeting, the board issued a resolution of intent to issue not to exceed $5.3 million in bonds for the construction of the commercial kitchen. The majority of this, of the repayment will come from the revenue generated by the facility itself. So therefore, there will be no tax increase in order to pay for these bonds. That's why they're called alternate revenue bonds. It's structured in such a way to have lower payments in the first couple of years so that the district has time to get the facility up and running. And so as I mentioned, there was a resolution of intent last meeting. This evening, we have the public hearing on the bonds, and then the board will be asked to approve the final resolution at the May board at the May board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Englert. Do any members of the Board of Education have any additional comments regarding this matter? Is there any written testimony concerning the proposed issuance of the general obligation school bonds to be read into the record by the secretary? Does anyone here wish to make any oral testimony or public comments regarding the proposed issuance of the general obligation school bonds? All persons desiring to be heard have been given an opportunity to present oral and written testimony with respect to the proposed issuance of the general obligation school bonds, alternate revenue source.
Mr. President, I move that
Madam
this
Secretary.
hearing be finally adjourned.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that this hearing be finally adjourned. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. I should say.
Mrs. Gordon,
Here. Oh, yeah, aye.
Mrs. McCray,
Aye.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Aye.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Mr. Murphy.
Aye. Motion carried. This public hearing is finally adjourned. Will the secretary please call the roll for the scheduled school board meeting for School District 162?
Mrs. Gordon,
Here.
Mrs. McCray,
Present.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Here.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Present.
Mr. Murphy.
Present. Thank you. At this point, we'll have communications, announcements, and schedules. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. We've just returned, as you're well aware, from our spring holiday, but it is at the end of the mid-quarter progress reports. We're going into quarter four. There are 7 weeks left in this marking period. April 26th, Southland will have their all-in ceremony, and I did want to mention something that I have a kind of a different sense of humor, but the valedictorian of the Southland class is Haley Love, but one of the teachers gave me a note that Haley wrote to actually Mr. Tomich, and he was the president of the Indiana at the time. Haley's been with us for 12 years. She's a graduate of 162, but she says, "Dear Mr. Tomich, I think that my bus needs a bus monitor. I and my friends are the only ones who don't argue or curse on the bus." And then she lists some names. They also like to choke, punch, and kick each other on the bus. And they sing songs that are very inappropriate that most grown-ups don't even know. So help me. If you would like to talk to me, I am a student here. I am a fourth grader in the fourth grade gifted, and I would love to talk to you. But if you want to talk to me after school, I'm on bus number 3. So I was given this by the teacher, and teachers keep things over the years, as you know. But Haley, that reminded me, and I pulled it out of the file today because she's at Penn State. Then she's going the next day to Stanford, I believe, on to Princeton, on to Yale. She's been accepted into 6 out of the 7 Ivy League colleges, and she's doing just fine. But Haley has always been outspoken. And when I see Haley in the hall, she said, Dr. Davis, I heard what you said, but would you allow me to present an alternative position to you? So, Mr. Tomich, Haley has been the same way since kindergarten. She is the spokesperson of the school, but one of these days she's going to be an outstanding attorney. But this is just one of the children that came through 162, but I thought that was just so interesting. We are asking the permission of the board. We plan on meeting as we did before COVID twice in May. And our first meeting would be on May 9th. We're asking permission of the board to meet on May 9th because that is a concert. We're also going back, and I will talk about that a little later, to having our annual band concerts where we bring over 400 of our band students together. So we've come full circle. We're evolving, and there will be 2 meetings in May, but the first one that we're bringing to your attention will be May 9th at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you. At this point, we will have an audience to visitors pertaining to agenda items only. Is there anyone present who wishes to address the board regarding to any item that is on the agenda? There being none, let us now move along to the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Mr. President,
Yes, Dr. Leatherwood.
move to approve the consent agenda dated April 18th, 2023, and every item contained therein.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Aye.
Mrs. McCray.
Aye.
Mrs. Gordon.
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Davis, the superintendent's report, please.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to call your attention on the consent agenda. You do see that the regularly scheduled meeting has been changed to May 9th. And then for the benefit of the public, we've approved the meeting dates for the next school year, starting on May 9th and going to June 18th, 2024. So for everyone's advanced planning, please. But I wanted to make an exciting announcement. Last board meeting, the board approved the change in transportation from Kickard to Safeway. And we did have a meeting today with Kickard. We haven't been doing well. And so I will have an announcement to make in terms of Safeway's evolution in to 162 at a faster pace than we anticipated. However, today we did have Safeway and Safeway's management as well as Kickard here. And I asked Mr. Barr about field trips. He said we would be delighted. So to the principals, children haven't been able to go anywhere for the past couple of years. And I did have, I believe, 4 field trip requests from Mrs. Houston, which would be the first one out. But Dr. Mays and Mrs. Calvin, I don't know about Mrs. McGuire. We have to think about the little 3- and 4-year-olds. But Dr. Healy, Safeway now has provided a means for us to take field trips. And I really can't tell you, even though I have a humorous tone in my voice, it is so important for our students to be able to get out of the building and to see the rest of the world. And so I know that you're doing something called Peter Pan. What is that, Mrs. Houston? And I wasn't aware that there's a new movie called Peter Pan, but we'll be prepared for Peter Pan. And then now I'm waiting for the other schools to respond because what about the Museum of Science and Industry? What about the Field Museum? What about the Chicago Historical Society? Oh my God, what about the zoo? And we can't do that, even though we've had traveling zoos, petting zoos come to our schools. I'm so happy that Safeway is saying that we'll look at this as an evolution in our contract. And so they are open to field trips. So I had to give you that news.
Yes, thank you for that.
But the most exciting news I have is something that we've been trying to do for several years, and that is we want graduate classes on our own campus. We want graduate classes on our own campus. We have been, we're making some headway with one of our universities before COVID. And then, of course, COVID came, but on the Southland board are 3 deans of 3 different colleges. And Roosevelt University wrote to us and said, Dr. Davis, we would be delighted to have a graduate class on campus. And so I presented to the teachers an Institute Day, and I'm sharing with you now that starting immediately, which will be in June, individuals who have a full-time substitute certificate, or they may simply have a college degree and have always wanted to teach, they will be able to enroll through us into Roosevelt University. Roosevelt University will offer a certification program as well as a master's program on our campus, and 18 months. If you have a bachelor's degree, you will be able to get not only certification, but a master's degree in education. And so I can't be more thrilled. But then Roosevelt wrote a grant, and they're going to pay for 40% of the tuition. As you know, we pay for 50% of the tuition. So when you look at this, I just think I can't tell you, Mr. Murphy and members of the board, how pleased I am. First of all, time is of the essence. And when you teach all day and then you have to travel a distance to a university, I think it discourages you. But we've wanted to have a degree program on campus, and now this is going to happen. It's going to happen immediately. So our liaison is Yvonne Williams. We went first to, the whole concept of grow your own. We have learning loss coordinators, and we have cadre subs who are out there. Many of them, not all, but many of them graduated from either Southland or Rich Township. They're there, and then they went on to college, and they're back with their college degrees. Some of them, their dream is to be a teacher. Others of them, we have one that wants to be a television star, but you may want to do something while you're getting to be a television star. So there are 14 of them, and so far 6 of them have joined and indicated that they're joining the program. So the only initial cost to a person who wanted to be a part of the program is $40 for the application fee.
Wow.
$40 for the application fee. So if you're thinking of the concept of grow your own, or if you're thinking if you're hearing this because we're streaming and you're out there and you have a degree and you've always wanted to be a teacher, you've always wanted to get your master's degree, please call us. Our main number. But really, Mr. Murphy, this is one of the most exciting things that we've had in a long time. But this was brought to us by Dr. Vinnie Hall. But the university is writing another grant. It has not been funded yet, Dr. Weatherwood, but it could pay for the total tuition. So I want to give Vinnie Hall, Dr. Hall, and Roosevelt just a round of applause. So you see the schedule, and we're happy to communicate with anyone that is not in the room but is interested. Our class size will be 15, and just to have the presence here in the community, I think it's just such a magnificent thing. But our teachers are aware, and there's been a good initial response. But May 24th, we'll be doing something that we haven't done in 3 years. We're coming back, And this is our annual band festival. We'll begin with our baby bands, and we love them. I guess, Dr. Kruger, we're going to have hot cross buns. Or is that, well, okay, he loves hot cross buns. And I know that we're going to start with that. But when we get to the Huth and the Illinois, such beautiful music, and it's just magnificent. But I see us coming back together as a symbol. And the symbol is we've gone through this pandemic, and perhaps there were some rough times, but we're back together now. And some of us may be still masked, some of us not, but it's no longer the threat that it was being COVID years ago. So please, May 24th, and there will be reminders. It will be at Governor State, and Governor State is off strike. So I just wanted to say that because we don't cross strike lines. So they're off strike. So that's a wonderful thing. But then I wanted to talk about our next parent workshop. I was extremely pleased on March 30th when we had our first workshop. Probably one of the best attended sessions was that conducted by Mr. Evans on social media. If I could make a recommendation to the board, and this has absolutely nothing to do with the board meeting, but if you would go online and you would look at Sunday's edition of 60 Minutes, where they talk about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
I thought it was fascinating, but we don't know where it's going in terms of education. That's why I recommend it to you. You saw there's Google has created a new format, and they gave them a prompt, The Old Man and the Sea. You remember the book?
Mhm.
Within 5 seconds, the computer wrote a short story. Then they asked that, told the computer to translate this story into prose. There was a poem that was generated as a result of this. So it's a lot to think about in terms of what we do in education. You know, we now have a mechanism that checks papers for plagiarism is what it does, but it is only checking for things that are plagiarized that have been published.
That's
So it's
right.
trying to pick up the nuances and words that are in published materials. What if this artificial intelligence becomes something that permeates our system, but you're talking about not published materials, you're talking about something that was created artificially at the time. And then I also paid some attention to the robots that were playing soccer, and they did not teach the robots. They gave them a prompt. They said, we would like you to figure out how to win the game. And the robots themselves practiced, and then all of a sudden they were flawless. And so I do recommend that you look at this. I think it's going to have, I'm not sure if it's positive or negative, but it's certainly going to have an impact on what we do. And that reminded me, and I came back and asked Mr. Lights, and we are using the mechanism that picks up plagiarism, because critical thinking skills and writing something that is unique and new is important to us as a world. But what if artificial intelligence changes our world in some way? But I do recommend that everyone look at that. I thought it was fascinating. I've watched it twice, but we'll see where it goes. And they're saying that this will be a reality probably in 5 years for us. So just a comment. But at our parent university, we didn't have anything to do with artificial intelligence, but we were looking at parent-teacher relationships. We were looking at social media. As you know, many of our children are so adept at technology that they're finding ways to get around our firewalls. Mr. Evans is constantly looking at it, trying to find a way to prevent them from getting around the firewalls. But many of them are just really quite good. And I'm not talking about high school students. I'm talking about, he's made visits to the Indiana and to the Huth, and they're thinking, these are younger children because they were born with this. Remember, this is something that we learned. Think back before there was technology and before a text message wasn't something that we do every few minutes probably, and there were no real cell phones. I challenge you because I lost my phone. If you're in a airport and you ask someone, where is there a pay phone? Where is there a pay phone? And after I finally found the pay phone, which is in an area I guess no one goes to anymore, then you have to find out how much does it cost to make a call, because, and then you don't know any numbers because of the fact that this is something that has become a part of it. But we are having our next parent university on April 20th. That's this week at 6:30 p.m. We invite everyone, and probably this is one of our most important topics: social, emotional, behavior supports. You do know that the pandemic affected all of us in different ways. And there is a degree of stress out there. What do we do with it? How do we turn it into something positive? Because stress in itself is not a negative. Sometimes we feel it and it just energizes us and moves us forward. But if we internalize this and it becomes a problem in the way that we approach the solution of problems and other issues, then we have to devise a way to look after. So there is a workshop here, and at this point, I think there's 60 some parents that are registered, but it's April 20th here in our district office. And so we do invite everyone to come and to become a part of that. And one of the things I do want to say publicly, I know that the board is going into executive session later, and that's one of the things that we'll talk about in detail. But I do see most of the leadership of our support organization, our teachers, are here tonight. And even separate and apart from the board, I want to thank them for everything that they've done, that they have led us through this pandemic. Even when they didn't think that it was a good idea, they taught in our schools, they did everything that they could. Now they've got this mastery of technology that we see intertwined in our classrooms. And so I know that the board later is going to look at the contract, but I want to thank them for everything that they do on a daily basis. But, you know, I also want to say that people think of negotiations as being confrontational. Never do we deviate from who we are as professionals. So if you wonder what goes on behind closed doors, it's a discussion of the issues. It's a discussion of really what they deserve. And that is just ample compensation to live a decent life. And I don't have an issue with that. But I actually look forward to sitting down with them. This is my 5th contract that I've negotiated. And there is not a tension, because I feel that we're listening to each other and we're learning from each other. And I really feel that that's the way that everyone should communicate. But I thank them for everything that they do. And it'll be my joy when I hear the will of the board as you consider the contract. But thank you for listening. And that concludes my report, unless there are questions.
You're welcome. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
Just a comment on the AI. There's good and there's maybe not so good. There was a comment on how it's possible, and it has been shown that it can recreate Dr. Davis's voice and face. And you think it's you, and it's AI. So
That's very true. I was discussing this with Mr. Lights, who of course is our Assistant Director of Technology, and he showed me how on the internet, using AI, they took a song that I think was by, you can correct me, Beyonce, and they asked the computer to have Rihanna sing it, and you really couldn't tell the difference. But yes, I don't know what I'll do if I'm ever imitated, but that's
Often imitated, never
Never
duplicated.
duplicate. Yes, yes, yes.
You know, it's interesting that Mrs. McCray, that you brought up that topic of responding, I should say, to the topic that Dr. Davis brought up about AI. One of the articles I read had to do with a teacher in a particular district outside of Illinois who essentially opined that artificial intelligence is here. We should not resist it. We should embrace it. She said, because the children are embracing it. And she said what she does is she encourages her children in her English class to enter a prompt into AI to write an essay on a particular subject. And then they bring that essay to the classroom. And in the classroom, she has them deconstruct the essay and then to write it in their own words. So there is some room for application here. And that is probably just the starting point in terms of what we can and will be doing in the educational space.
I'd like to think it through.
Mr. President,
Dr. Leatherwood.
I think to that latter point, it's funny because that's what we do as scholars. You know, you take
Yes.
someone's argument, someone's paper, you deconstruct it, and you always ask, why can't I just use block quotes? You know, and it's like, you know, write it in your own words.
Absolutely.
But to this thing of teacher development, I just want to say I'm so grateful for the leadership around this work. I mean, hearing this for the first time, it is just blowing me out of my seat. I've been in so many conversations. I said, as a founding member for President Barack Obama Thrive Chicago's Marvelous Keeper Action Team, where we created a curriculum for this teacher pipeline. We created a curriculum for this teacher pipeline, and we have like 4 or 5 schools where we piloted this 12th grade exposure to urban education thing, where, you know, young people would go in and get exposed to urban education as a potential profession. I've been in conversations with folks in all across the state and across the nation, talking about the teacher pipeline, especially for individuals of color. And to know that you all are not just talking about the teacher pipeline, you are establishing a space where individuals can come in and get credentialed.
Yes.
I mean, that is absolute. I've been so frustrated by the conversations, and they're happening in all these different places, but you all are leading by example from the front. It is absolutely extraordinary. I am just so impressed over and over and over again with this district. I mean, all I can do is be honest. I'm just so impressed over and over and over again. The stuff about the transition, you know, the kids transitioning from one grade to the next, from, you know, from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. You have this opportunity for individuals to be credentialed here on campus in the South suburbs. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for just stewarding such a tremendous example for all of us to really learn from, because I have been privy to the conversations, but we are doing something here. You are doing something here. Your team is doing something here, and that's just absolutely extraordinary. And I started the Black Male Educators. I say this and I'm done. I started the Black Male Educators Alliance of Illinois, which is a professional society of educators and other stakeholders who have come together to support the recruitment, retention, and development of Black male teachers. And we get so many phone calls about, hey, can you help us staff our district, or can you help us staff our schools? Right? We need more men of color in our schools. I mean, I've had so many calls. You are developing teachers right here in this space. I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. So thank you again for your stewardship. It's phenomenal. And I'm gushing because it really does mean that much to me. And I know it means a lot for what we can show the world about how to do this and to do it the right way.
Excellent. Very well stated.
Yes, sir.
And don't worry about gushing, because we've decided to yield all of our time on the subject to you. So you represented us well. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful comments.
Yeah.
And I concur. So Dr. Davis, is there anything more on the superintendent's report?
No, sir,
Thank you. Well, moving right along, how about legislation?
not at this point.
Nothing. In terms of legislation, I know that Chicago is preparing to swear in its next mayor. And so it will be interesting to see the ramifications and perhaps the impacts, I should say, of what that does for the rest of the state in terms of the leadership in Chicago. So there could be some legislation coming fairly soon. Now on to new business. So is there any motion regarding new business?
Yes, Mr. President,
Madam Secretary,
move to approve the award of the contract for technology equipment under E-rate to CDWG in the amount of $64,576.12.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? No discussion. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gordon,
Aye.
Mrs. McCray,
Aye.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Aye.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Mr. Murphy.
Aye. Do we have anything else regarding new business?
Mr. President, move to approve the contracts for asphalt paving work at multiple buildings to Q Paving in the amount of $888,490.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Mr. President, it's our intention this summer to repave the parking lots and the playground areas to a limited extent. We don't have equipment for all 7 schools.
Yes, thank you. We've had a motion, a second, and discussion. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Aye.
Mrs. McCray,
Aye.
Mrs. Gordon.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there anything pertaining to old business?
No, sir.
Moving right along to board member issues and reports. Board colleagues, what say you?
I thought you had a great use of the word opined. Thank you for that.
Why, thank you.
It's not a word you often hear.
Every now and then you have to go back into, the realm of the archaic and pull something out.
Love it.
Okay. There being no board member issues or reports, we will now move to our second audience to visitors. This is an opportunity for members of the audience who are present to address the board for items pertaining to education, of course, but not necessarily on the agenda. Is there one? And I see someone there smiling as she might very well have heard that question in spaces other than in a board meeting room. That question of, is there one? Moving right along, executive session. Is there a motion to go into that executive session that Dr. Davis referenced earlier?
Mr. President,
Yes, Madam Secretary.
move that the board go into executive session to consider pending, probable, or imminent litigation, information regarding a student discipline case, and the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees or public officials, collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, security procedures, school building safety and security, and the use of personnel and equipment to respond to an actual, a threatened, or reasonably potential danger to the safety of employees, students, staff, the public or public property, or the sale or purchase of securities, investments, or investment contracts.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
Mrs. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Dr. Leatherwood,
Aye.
Mrs. McCray,
Aye.
Mrs. Gordon.
Aye.
The board will now go into recess and go also into executive session.
And we're returning here after.
We are returning here after the executive session.